December 4th, 1906. The subterranean dark of the inland crystal salt mine in Salina, Utah. A veteran commercial miner named Thomas Albright, 39, a man who had spent 19 years drilling through the subterranean deposits of the Great Basin, stopped his pickaxe mid-swing. The air down on level 4 was usually 85 degrees and choked with white halite dust, but Albright felt a sudden icy draft cut through the humidity. He held up his brass carbide lamp. The flickering flame illuminated a fissure in the rock-salt wall where a dynamite charge had been detonated 20 minutes prior. Instead of uncovering another solid vein of commercial-grade sodium chloride, the blast had blown completely inward. Albright leaned closer, expecting to see a hazardous pocket of trapped methane gas or a natural geological fault line. Instead, the dim light reflected off something physically impossible for a geological formation buried 400 feet beneath the Utah desert. He was staring at a perfectly flat, hand-carved block of polished black basalt. Albright reached out and brushed away a thick layer of prehistoric salt crust. The stone beneath was flawless, displaying geometric tool marks that no natural process could replicate. He dropped his pickaxe. According to the standard history textbooks, the indigenous peoples of the Great Basin in the millennia before European contact were non-agricultural hunter-gatherers who utilized basic stone tools and left no permanent stone architecture. Mainstream archaeology insists that no advanced engineering existed on the North American continent outside of the Mississippian mound builders or the ancestral Puebloans of the Southwest. But this subterranean structure was buried beneath hundreds of feet of solid, uncompromised rock-salt strata that geologists state took millions of years to accumulate. It shouldn't exist. To admit that a massive, engineered stone complex sat sealed within a deep geological salt deposit would mean rewriting the entire timeline of human evolution, migration, and technological capability. Instead of calling in university researchers to document the find, the mine owners quietly halted operations on level 4, confiscated the workers' logs, and classified the entire sector as a structural hazard zone. This is the story of how a routine commercial mining operation in central Utah stumbled upon an architectural anomaly that threatens to dismantle the entire accepted timeline of global civilization. From the highly guarded corporate ledgers that recorded the incident to the precise physical measurements that mainstream academics refuse to discuss on camera, this is the suppressed reality of the Salina salt mine anomaly. But here is the detail that the regional historical societies and orthodox geologists will not address. The miners did not just find an ancient wall. When they cleared enough salt to step through the breach, they realized they were standing on a balcony overlooking a massive, sunken structural courtyard. And there, pressed deeply into the layer of fine salt dust that covered the stone floor, was a single trail of bipedal footprints. Whoever or whatever made those prints did not walk into the chamber to hide or build. The prints started at the exact center of the impossible room, walked up the ancient stone steps, and led straight out into the active mine shafts where the 20th century workers were standing. To understand how an advanced stone structure could end up buried deep inside a salt deposit, we have to look closely at the baseline history we are taught in school. The official narrative states that the geography of Utah was shaped over millions of years by the evaporation of ancient Lake Bonneville. Mainstream geologists claim that the massive rock salt deposits in the Sevier Valley were formed during the Jurassic period, roughly 150 million years ago, as large inland seas dried up and left behind vast beds of crystalline halite. For over a century, the academic consensus has been that these subterranean salt formations remained entirely undisturbed until modern industrial mining companies arrived in the late 19th century to drill and blast them apart for commercial livestock and industrial use. The Inland Crystal Salt Company began its operations near Salina with the assumption that they were extracting a completely uniform, natural resource. The men who worked these lines were not archaeologists looking for antiquities. They were blue-collar laborers, many of them recent immigrants from Scandinavia and Italy, working 12-hour shifts under brutal conditions. They used steam drills, black powder, and hand shovels to clear thousands of tons of salt per week. The work was strictly procedural. A team would drill a series of holes into the face of the salt wall, pack them with explosives, detonate the wall from a safe distance, and then move in with timber supports to stabilize the roof before loading the shattered salt into iron carts. The discovery occurred on a Tuesday evening during the winter shift. The mine records show that the crew on level 4 had been pushing a new horizontal drift toward the eastern boundary of the corporate property line. The geological maps indicated that the salt vein in this direction should have extended for at least another half-mile before hitting the surrounding shale bedrock. But when the dust from the evening blast cleared, the miners did not find the typical fractured white walls of halite. The explosion had breached a void. The initial confusion of the workmen quickly turned to profound unease. Thomas Albright and his assistant, an Italian labourer named foreign national Giovanni Rossi, 24, were the first to crawl through the jagged opening. They found themselves standing on a ledge composed of dark, non-crystalline rock. When they raised their lamps, the light did not bounce off the reflective facets of salt crystals. It was absorbed by a massive open space that smelled faintly of ozone and ancient mineral dust. Albright initially assumed they had broken into a natural cavern system, which was a constant danger in underground mining due to the risk of flooding or structural collapse. But as he moved his lamp along the wall to his left, he realized the surface was completely vertical, perfectly plumb, and bore the distinct parallel striations of mechanical planing. It was an interior wall of a colossal building. The two men stood in complete silence as the reality of what they were looking at began to sink in. They were standing inside a structure that had been completely encased in solid rock salt. The textbook timeline of the region was instantly broken. But the physical presence of the stone wall wasn't the crazy part. What the miners found when they examined the engineering of the space shocked everyone who climbed into the breach that night. Let us break down the physical architecture of the Salina anomaly using the exact 5-step forensic methodology that mainstream institutions avoid. The site consisted of a sunken square atrium measuring exactly 44 feet by 44 feet, surrounded by 16 monolithic pillars. Each pillar was composed of solid, dark grey basalt, a volcanic rock that does not naturally occur anywhere within a 25-mile radius of the mine site. The official explanation offered by the corporate representatives during a brief internal inquiry was that this was a natural formation of columnar basalt that had been shifted by tectonic activity into the salt bed, and that the miners were simply misinterpreting rough natural fractures for human craftsmanship. But look at the engineering reality. The pillars were not rough natural columns. They were perfectly cylindrical, measuring exactly 2.44 meters in diameter and rising to a uniform height of 12 feet. Each column was topped with a square capital that featured a double-recessed geometric groove running around its entire perimeter. The tolerances between the basalt blocks that formed the walls were less than 1/50th of an inch. A modern steel razor blade could not be inserted between the joints. Furthermore, the tool marks on the surface of the basalt blocks did not show the irregular pitting of flint chisels or iron hammers. Instead, the stone displayed deep, continuous, spiral grooves that ran down the length of the blocks at a perfectly consistent pitch of 1/8 of an inch per revolution. To cut volcanic basalt with that level of speed and precision requires a tool hardness that far exceeds steel. In modern industrial manufacturing, achieving this type of surface finish on hard igneous rock requires rotary, diamond-tipped core drills and automated hydraulic feeding systems operating under thousands of pounds of continuous pressure. The ancient builders of this atrium did not use primitive hand tools or abrasive sand strings. They possessed motorized, high-torque machining equipment capable of slicing through basalt like softwood. Remember this specific toolmark pattern because it is going to show up on another continent on the Giza Plateau in Egypt later in our investigation. The implication of these spiral grooves is undeniable. The individuals who constructed this subterranean atrium possessed an industrial infrastructure that matches or exceeds our own. Yet, this entire complex was completely sealed within a salt deposit that mainstream science claims has been solid since before the dinosaurs walked the earth. The mathematical and mechanical reality of the stone cuts proves that a highly advanced civil engineering project took place on the North American continent in deep antiquity, and someone has intentionally omitted it from the historical record. The structural layout of the room became even more baffling when the shift foreman, a mining engineer named Arthur Pendleton, 42, descended a set of 9 monumental steps into the center of the atrium. The steps were completely unworn. Unlike the stone stairs of ancient Rome or medieval Europe, which show distinct dips in the center from centuries of human foot traffic, these stairs were razor-sharp, as if they had been cut, positioned, and then immediately sealed away from the world. When Pendleton reached the floor of the atrium, he noted that the central area was occupied by a raised stone platform measuring exactly 12 feet by 12 feet. The top of the platform was perfectly smooth, except for a circular indentation in the center that measured 18 inches across and 3 inches deep. The interior of the indentation was lined with a thin, tarnished layer of a white metal alloy that initial on-site chemical tests indicated was 92% pure silver, mixed with 8% of an unidentified crystalline element that resisted acid corrosion. What the ground-penetrating radar found decades later, when an independent team scanned the exterior of the mine property, shocked everyone who managed to obtain the leaked data files. The scans revealed that the Sunken Atrium was not an isolated chamber. It was merely the upper pavilion of a vast, multi-tiered subterranean complex that extends downward for at least 600 feet below the current bottom of the mine shaft. The radar profiles show a series of massive, parallel tunnels radiating outward from the central atrium like the spokes of a wheel, each one terminating in a large rectangular vault. The entire layout bears a striking resemblance to a modern underground particle accelerator or a massive electromagnetic grid system. The human element of this discovery is preserved in the frantic handwritten field notes of Arthur Pendleton. He spent 3 hours inside the chamber before corporate management ordered everyone out. In his journal, which was preserved by his descendants, he noted that the air inside the atrium was completely devoid of moisture. Rock salt is incredibly hygroscopic. It absorbs moisture from the air instantly. Yet, the interior of the stone building remained completely dry, protected by an unseen atmospheric barrier that kept the surrounding salt walls from weeping or collapsing into the void. Pendleton recorded that when he touched the central silver-lined indentation, his ears began to ring with a high-pitched frequency that did not stop until he stepped off the raised platform. The most disturbing aspect of the room, however, was the dust. Because the chamber had been sealed for an untold number of millennia, a layer of fine, powdery white salt dust had settled over the dark basalt floor, creating a uniform coating approximately 1/4 of an inch thick. It was the perfect recording medium for movement. When Pendleton shone his lamp across the floor of the platform, he saw a distinct series of footprints. The prints were deeply impressed into the salt dust, indicating that whatever made them carried significant physical weight. They were bipedal, showing a clear left-right alternating gait. The foot shape was structurally identical to a human foot, featuring 5 distinct toes, a well-defined arch, and a rounded heel. However, the measurements were wrong. Each footprint was exactly 16.5 inches in length and 7 inches wide at the ball of the foot. The stride length between each print was an astonishing 5.2 feet. But the size of the feet wasn't the detail that made the miners freeze. It was the direction of the trail. The official story that corporate handlers wanted the men to sign off on was that a native scout or an early Spanish explorer must have found an alternative entrance to the cavern from the surface, walked down into the room, and left the prints. But look closely at the physical layout of the trail. The footprints did not originate from the breach that the miners had just blown through the wall. They did not come down the stairs from any hidden ceiling shaft or side door. The trail began abruptly at the very center of the room, right next to the silver-lined circular indentation on the raised platform. The first print was a deep heel strike right at the edge of the metal ring. From there, the steps walked away from the platform, proceeded across the basalt floor, ascended the 9 stone steps, and walked directly toward the eastern wall of the atrium. The trail ended exactly where the miners had just broken through the salt wall. The final pair of prints were positioned directly beneath the shattered lip of the halite rock, oriented facing out toward the modern mine shaft. Whoever made those prints had been standing inside that dark, silent room, facing the solid salt wall, long before the miners ever set their dynamite charges. It was as if they knew exactly where the blast would occur, stood waiting for the wall to break, and then walked out into the 20th century the moment the opening was created. The mainstream academic pushback began less than 48 hours after the breach occurred. On December 6, 1906, 3 executive representatives from the Inland Crystal Salt Company arrived at the Salina mine site on a private train from Salt Lake City. They were accompanied by a regional administrative official from the Bureau of Mines and an Orthodox historian from a local state college. The workers, who had been present on the night shift, were called into the main office one by one. The corporate executives offered a series of shifting, highly unscientific excuses to explain away the physical evidence. First, they claimed that the basalt pillars were merely an unusual geological intrusion known as a salt dome pillar, where pressure forces surrounding rock into strange shapes. When the miners pointed out the perfect geometric capitals and the parallel machined grooves, the explanation shifted. The company claimed that the entire incident was a practical joke staged by the night shift workers using carved wooden blocks and artificial dust prints to simulate an archaeological discovery in an attempt to halt work and demand higher wages. The pressure placed on the researchers and eyewitnesses who dared to speak the truth was immediate and severe. Thomas Albright refused to sign a statement affirming that the discovery was a hoax. He insisted that he had touched the stone, measured the tool marks, and seen the footprints with his own eyes. The next morning, Albright was terminated from his position for alleged safety violations regarding explosive handling. His mining credentials were permanently revoked, rendering him unemployable across the entire state of Utah. He spent the remainder of his life working an isolated farm in southern Idaho, refusing to speak to reporters or historical societies about what he saw. The paper trail of missing documents confirms a systematic corporate and institutional cover-up. The official annual report of the Utah State Mine Inspector for the year 1906 is publicly available in the state archives today. However, if you examine the physical ledger, you will find that pages 84, 85, and 86, which cover the midwinter operations of the Salina sector, have been cleanly excised from the binding with a sharp blade. The entry for December 1906 simply skips from a routine ventilation report on Level 3 to equipment inventory list from January 1907. Furthermore, the local newspaper, the Salina Press, had prepared a short front-page article about the discovery, scheduled for the morning edition of December 8th. The headline was set to read, "Ancient Stone Temple Discovered in Deep Salt Mine," but the printing press was halted at midnight by order of the county sheriff. The existing copies of that print run were seized and burned in the alleyway behind the newspaper office. The revised edition that hit the streets the next morning contained no mention of the mine. Instead, the front page was dominated by a lengthy story about a minor timber cave-in on Level 4 that had necessitated the permanent flooding and sealing of that entire branch of the mine to protect the structural integrity of the surface. Properties. The corporate payroll ledgers provide the final piece of financial evidence documenting the suppression. The entire night shift crew of 14 men disappeared from the company roster in a single day. The financial books show a massive, irregular cash expenditure listed under miscellaneous corporate overhead for December 1906. Each worker was paid a lump sum equivalent to 12 months of standard wages, accompanied by a strict non-disclosure agreement. Within 48 hours of the event, 11 of those 14 men had been placed on a chartered westbound train with tickets directly to San Francisco, California. They were effectively dispersed across the country and warned that any public statement regarding the Salina anomaly would result in immediate asset seizure and federal prosecution under industrial sabotage laws. To understand the true origin of the Salina salt mine structure, we must stop looking at it as an isolated local anomaly and start connecting it to identical architectural discoveries across the globe. Mainstream archaeology treats every unusual stone site as an independent product of a specific isolated culture. But when we analyze the engineering, geometry, and material properties of these structures, a completely different picture emerges. We see a highly unified global technological paradigm that operated on Earth long before our current historical record began. Consider the material used in the Utah Atrium: solid, high-density volcanic basalt. This exact same stone was chosen by the builders of the pre-dynastic complexes at West Giza and the underground vaults of the Serapeum at Saqqara. Basalt is notoriously difficult to quarry and machine, but it possesses unique physical properties. It is rich in iron and olivine crystals, making it an excellent conductor of piezoelectric energy. When a structure built of basalt is subjected to immense geological pressure, such as being encased in thousands of tons of shifting tectonic rock salt, the crystalline structures within the stone compress, creating a continuous, low-voltage electrical charge. The geographic positioning of the Sunken Atrium is also not random. It sits precisely at 38.9 degrees north latitude. If you trace this exact line of latitude across the globe, it intersects several of the most anomalous ancient sites on Earth. It runs directly through the ancient megalithic ruins of ancient Mycenae in Greece, the stone alignments of western Turkey, and the mysterious prehistoric stone structures hidden within the mountain ranges of Central Asia. These sites are not independent developments. They are the surviving surface and subsurface nodes of a vast, interconnected worldwide energy or communication grid that was laid out with precise mathematical alignment to the Earth's rotational axis. This global grid system was active during a period of human history that has been completely erased by a catastrophic global event. Geologists who operate outside the mainstream consensus, such as those investigating the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, have compiled definitive proof that between 12,800 and 11,600 years ago, the Earth underwent a series of cataclysmic impacts from a disintegrating comet. This event caused immediate, widespread melting of the continental ice sheets, resulting in massive torrents of water that reshaped the topography of North America. It was during this period of global deluge that the Salina structure was submerged. The massive inland floodwaters washed over the Great Basin, carrying millions of tons of dissolved mineral salts and planetary debris into the deep structural valleys of Utah. As the waters rapidly evaporated under the intense heat of the subsequent climatic shift, the dissolved salt precipitated out of the water at an unprecedented rate, forming thick layers of halite that quickly encased the basalt buildings before they could be eroded by wind or rain. The structure didn't sink into the salt. The salt was deposited around it in a sudden, catastrophic mineral event that sealed the complex in an airtight, prehistoric vault. The alternative theory that explains the footprints is both logical and terrifying. The advanced individuals who built these subterranean grids knew that a planetary catastrophe was coming. They possessed astronomical instruments that allowed them to track the approaching comet core. While the surface of the planet was being ravaged by fire and water, the elite technicians of this lost civilization retreated into the very deep underground complexes they had engineered. They waited out the cataclysm inside stone vaults, designed to withstand seismic shocks and radioactive shifts. The footprints in the salt dust at the Salina mine represent the final moment of this underground survival strategy. The individual who stood at the center of the basalt atrium was not a primitive hunter looking for shelter. They were an operative of an advanced human lineage that had survived the dark ages of the planet's history. They stood by the silver-lined platform, utilizing the remaining residual energy of the basalt grid to monitor the surface conditions. When the industrial drills of the modern American miners finally broke through the rock salt wall in 1906, the occupant did not panic. They realized that the surface of the Earth had finally returned to a level of technological development where human civilization was resuming its industrial cycle. They stepped off the platform, walked up the steps, and quietly passed through the breach into our modern world. Today, the site of the Salina salt mine anomaly remains completely inaccessible to the public. The inland crystal salt mine went through a series of corporate acquisitions over the course of the 20th century, eventually being absorbed by larger international chemical conglomerates. The lower sectors of Level 4 were backfilled with thousands of tons of industrial slag and flooded with high-density brine, creating a highly corrosive barrier that would destroy any modern camera equipment or unauthorized diving gear. The official corporate maps of the mine layout now show Level 4 as a solid, unexcavated block of natural halite. The long-term consequences of this discovery for our collective human identity are profound. We are raised to believe in a comforting narrative of linear progress. We are told that humanity started as primitive apes, slowly moved through the Stone Age, discovered agriculture, built cities, and finally reached the pinnacle of technological achievement with the internet and modern aerospace engineering. This narrative makes us feel secure. It makes us believe that we are the masters of our destiny and the most advanced beings to ever inhabit this planet. But the basalt pillars hidden beneath the Utah desert tell a completely different story. They expose our deep, institutional human amnesia. They prove that civilization is not a straight line. It is a cycle that has been interrupted multiple times by global cataclysms and systematic institutional gatekeeping. We are not the first advanced civilization to walk the earth. We are merely the latest group to rebuild from the ashes of a forgotten predecessor. The institutional gatekeepers at mainstream universities and government organizations maintain this cover-up because they understand that history is the ultimate tool of social control. If a population believes they are the apex of human achievement, they are compliant and easy to manage. But if they realize that an older, more advanced civilization existed before us, and that it was completely wiped out by natural cyclical processes, it creates a dangerous paradigm shift. It forces us to realize that our modern industrial society is incredibly fragile, that our institutions are temporary, and that we are not insulated from the cosmic and geological forces of the universe. Uncovering our true past matters because it provides the blueprint for our survival. The lost civilization that constructed the subterranean basalt grids left behind clues in the stone, in the geometry of their buildings, and in the enduring physical anomalies that modern science tries to dismiss as practical jokes or geological flukes. By studying the tool marks, the material properties, and the global alignments of these suppressed sites, we can begin to piece together the lost mechanical knowledge of our ancestors. We can unlock alternative methods of energy generation, architecture, and environmental management that could safeguard our species against the next inevitable turn of the planetary wheel. Mainstream history wants you to believe that the American West was an untouched wilderness until the arrival of modern pioneers and industrial corporations. They want you to believe that the deep rock salt of Utah holds nothing but natural mineral crystals. But the missing pages of the 1906 mining logs tell a completely different story. They tell us that 400 feet beneath the desert lies a monument to a time when humans commanded the forces of nature with machinery that makes our modern equipment look primitive. The only question left is not whether these advanced civilizations existed. The only question left is when the next wall will break and what will walk out of the dark.